Hello, everybody. It's time for another episode, and this time we're going to cover battle tactics. Sorry, I know this was probably a long time coming. I tried to publish one last week, but I had some technical issues with recording, so this time around, I'm hoping this works just fine. It would really suck to have to redo this again from scratch, but for the most part, I just want to talk about in brief highlights. And this is going to take a while because I am going to cover the battle tactics in fully, and then I'm going to talk about the missions and how they kind of interact with the missions. I will start off with saying that reason I haven't done this episode earlier was mostly because I wanted to get more experience with the game in high places. This is fundamentally a complete rewrite of how you score points and how you win games, and I didn't feel like I was going to be a voice of expertise unless I had played a couple games, tried a couple combinations under my belt first, and just really come down with what I think is an ideal situation and how better understand it. I did the first few. I think I've only been to one or two events since the GHB came out, and I've made some mistakes really in picking my battle tactics, even for me. So it's really important that you pick the right two, and it's not just the right two in general. It's a right two for the mission stack you're playing at the event. There are some missions, and especially for some armies, that some of these battle tactic paths are incredibly hard. First things first, so I will point out for the entire audience, do not worry about scoring all three of them. I don't think it's reasonable to expect that you will score 30 points with battle tactics. I think 20 is a respectable number. It's for most players. 30 is usually because either something is going insanely in your favor, or your opponent just doesn't really. There's a skill mismatch or luck mismatch. When we're 30 isn't really the target goal here for scoring points for battle tactics. It's 20. 15 is good. 20 is ideal. Obviously 30 is great, right? If you get anything above 20, it's fantastic. But I think those comes down to just literally how the game plays and what the skill mismatch is. So first things first, just wipe that out of your mind. It's not like previous GHBs where you should be scoring 5 battle tactics a game, maxing all of them potential. In this case, 20 is good. I think everybody kind of walked away from this edition, from the start of this edition, realizing that scoring max battle tactics shouldn't be happening quite often. It should be kind of a rarity. When I say rarity, it shouldn't happen. It should not happen in majority, right? So, with that said in mind, let's go right into some of the battle tactic. We're going to start with Master the Path here. This is the first battle card. And yes, I'm using the site that will not be named for this. So hopefully it will operate and function with me as I go through it. Master the Path is probably going to be one of the most taken options, I think, in most of the games. Not necessarily as the first option, but as the second option. A couple things, the reason why. It has a really good early option. Killing an enemy hero at any point during the game is good. Or an enemy died at some point. There are some matchups where it's kind of hard to complete that one, so it is kind of gatekeeping. But I think through the game, the opportunity cost for a player to kill an enemy hero is pretty high, at least by turn 3, right? Ideally, you want to be able to do any of these first steps earlier than turn 3, then no later than turn 3, right? Because you need to be able to complete the other two, or at least the next one by turn 4 or 5, right? So that's kind of in my mind, that's how most of these needs to be doable early for step 1. The reason I like this one specifically is even if you do in turn 3, the Seize the Path option is relatively accessible for a lot of armies. Killing an enemy hero is accessible for almost every army. It just depends on at which speed you're going to be able to do it. Seize the Path is accessible for everybody, which is I'll read it out loud. You complete this battle tactic at the end of your turn if there are more friendly units in neutral territory than enemy units. If there are no neutral territories in the battle plane you're playing, you complete this tactic at the end of your turn, and there are no enemy units within the friendly territory. So, Seize the Path is very accessible, especially if it's later in the game, when attrition is wearing low. Even if it's early in the game, if the mission has a neutral territory and you're playing an army that is playing for scouting forces, then you're more likely than not going to score Seize the Path. Now, if there is no man's land, or basically their territories are touching or covering the entire map, that one gets a little bit trickier unless it's the second half of the game, right? Second half of the game, if you're de facto winner or de facto winning, you should be able to focus down the units in your opponent's in your territory versus, you know, your units in your opponent's territory. So the game kind of like plays okay on both ends of the spectrum in terms of like timing, right? The issue of that one, of course, is armies which are not designed to be really reactive to teleportation or speed of your opponents. Like that could be tricky to stop your opponent from having units in your territory. And it's, you know, of course, very well telegraphed by your opponent to try to stop. You know, so it is, in that regard, it is hard, but it is accessible. It is doable for most armies, which is why Seize the Path, you know, step 1 of Master and step 2 is quite good. Step 3 gets a little harder. You complete this battle tactic at the end of your turn if at least 3 different friendly units are wholly within 9 inches of a different corner of the battlefield, and only one of those corners is wholly within friendly territory. No more than one of those units can have been set up this turn. Once again, armies are doing scouting. Really, you know, don't struggle with this one, typically because they're designed for that. Armies which are more designed for, like, let's say, taking the center and pushing castle types, they struggle within the last step on this one a lot. So in that regard, like, once again, it comes down to really army design, especially for Master of the Path. I think castle builds are still pretty good, or like center table builds are still pretty good with Master. It's just like you're probably not going to do step 3, right, in reality, or you just have to do a lot of thinking about how to set up step 3 for Master of the Path. So I think Master of the Path is a great battle tactic choice. I'd rate it as, like, in terms of difficulty, a 1 to 10. I'd probably rate it as like a 6. It's not difficult. It's doing what you need to do, and it synergizes well with some of the other battle tactic options. So I like Master of the Path a lot. And like I said, I think you'll see it as not necessarily the first pick, but the second pick of a lot of army designs. Now we move to Restless Energy. I'll caveat that Restless Energy is also quite a good design in terms of it wants you to do the things the missions are designed for, like basically take primary points, control board state. It really plays into that. So Restless Energy is quite good as well. The only downside is the complexity of the second and third step. Not that I'll just go into it instead of me just rambling on about it. You know, step 1, control an objective that was controlled by your opponent at the start of the turn. That one's very accessible early, right? Like, the game is very much like you take, I take kind of situation. Now, granted, if you're going first, you can't do Restless Energy turn 1 unless you're a very specific type of pitting armies. So you might not score it until turn 2. If you're going bottom of 1, you might still not be able to score the top one, depending on your opponent understanding that you have Restless Energy and not giving you that option very easily. But either way, it should be an achievable tactic by turn 2. In terms of like controlling it. Once again, it's going to come down to like who goes first and all that, but in that turn, but like for the most part, like it's an easy one you can achieve early, and it's doing what you need to do to win the game anyway, right? So it's not like you're not diverting from the flow path of the game to do it. Invasive species, you complete this battle tactic at the end of your turn if you control every objective in enemy territory. If there are no objectives in enemy territory, you complete this battle tactic at the end of your turn if you control every objective that was controlled by your opponent at the start of the turn. Invasive species sounds really hard, but in the mission packet, we'll go over it in a bit at the end of going all through these cards again, it's not as difficult. There are some missions where it's incredibly difficult, and then some other missions where it's not. So, once again, I said earlier, it's going to come down to mission pack design. So if you know what your missions you're playing on, you can basically rate if Restless Energy is a high or low probability of like taking, right? So it's not. I'm going to say depending on the map, it's either easy or hard to do invasive species. Now, if you're also like the types of armies really depend on this, because if you're kind of like this like scouting force design or whiteboard state teleportation things, like invasive species might be much easier to do than some other armies can, but it doesn't change the fact that like to do invasive species on certain maps, you have to kind of like expose yourself a lot. So I don't necessarily think like it's necessarily completely ideal. Finally, the last step is Roots Intertwine. You complete this battle and you control every objective on the battlefield. Now, this one is interesting because it sounds incredibly hard, and it is, if the game is not going in one way or another. If the game is going against you, it's probably not. You're not going to do it. But if the game is going in your favor, the high likelihood, if you're at that step, you're going to do it, and you're going to get it anyway. So, and the reason why Restless Energy is kind of this weird one is because like the last step is doable just by you already playing to the game and doing the things you need to win the game. So you just get it, and it doesn't really require you to do, unlike the previous one in Master of the Path, which is like you have to take these corners and you have to really spread, and in some cases the objectives are not near the corners. Most of the time when you're playing the game, you're going to be playing towards the objectives. So in a sense, like it's great if you're winning the game, not so good if you're obviously losing the game. It's almost impossible, but at that point, like, if you're losing the game, you're looking for invasive species. There's still an upside potential of just doing it, root intertwine, like in a situation where you were able to do invasive species the turn before, and then you were somehow given top of turn, or you take top of turn without suffering the penalties of a double, and you just do roots intertwine as well. Like because if you can do invasive species, roots intertwine are very accessible. So yeah. No, how do I rate this? It's so weird. Depending on the mission stack, Restless Energy can be like, in terms of complexity of doability, can be like a low 3 to like a 7, right? Depending on the mission stacks and army combination. But Restless Energy is probably going to be a very popular one, taken as well by players. I think it's quite good, and I don't see like a lot of like additional complexity in that. Third one is Intercept and Recover. So how do I describe Intercept and Recover? I've taken it. I don't think it's bad. I think Intercept and Recover is for armies that like don't really have a good second battle tactic path option. And in that example, definitely Fire Slayers. When we're like kind of struggling with a battle, two board state control battle tactics. So having a kill battle tactic option is really useful for that type of army. The problem is it's really hard to get the full 15 out of this because how it interacts with doubles. Even if you take it's not one of those tactics where you're going to get 50 points consistently. It's also sometimes hard for armies like Fire Slayers to get like even like 1 or 2 because like they can pick the units like they're just going to keep away from you the entire game. There's some armies that can do that, so you have to be cognizant of that. But for the most part, it's agnostic of the maps, which is the difference between all of the other one. Is it doesn't require you to basically design around the board state or the map state if you want. So that's why you would probably take it. Is if you have an army that struggles with board states and map states, this is why you would consider Intercept and Recover. I don't think it should ever be your first choice. It should definitely be your second choice if you feel that you don't have a good second options for yourself. I think a lot of players might also take it because it's a simple equation to solve versus the other ones require sometimes a little bit more complexity and foresight and planning to do correctly. But the nice thing about Intercept and Recover, unlike the other battle tactics, is it's a lot harder for your opponent to counterplay it or to try to block it. Like, yes, they can hide their units. Yes, they can be not as aggressive with them. Yes, blah, blah, blah. But it's a lot harder to just say, like, oh, you need to take this objective this turn to get the next step. I'm just going to body block you off it. Like, or I'm going to make it impossible or as hard as possible for you to achieve it. In Intercept and Recover, like, it doesn't, outside of just literally keeping things away from you, it's not necessarily doable to achieve. I don't think with the secondary restrictions of what this does in terms of like losing it if you take the double, blah, 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 and actually, it's not even about double. It's not even a doubling. I don't even think doubling with no penalty saves you from this, if I remember correctly, because it just says, I think it has its own like mechanic. So like, you just, once again, secondary option. Cool. Oh, ranking in terms of durability, 5. It's middle of the road. It's not easiest. It's not the hardest. The one thing is it doesn't like depend on board state. Or map state, so it's just like that's what you would consider it. Wrathful Cycles. I really wanted to like this one. I tried really hard to make it work. In the beginning, especially, fundamentally I like Wrathful Cycle. It's just and we'll go over the details of why it comes into problems. It's just literally comes down to the second step. So, firstly, you start with Defiant Surge, which is you complete this battle taking you to control more objectives than your opponent. So, unlike Restless Energy, which is take an objective away from your opponent, this one is just have more objectives than your opponent. So, if you are made to go first, or you're going first ever most games, you're going to be able to do Defiant Surge like on top of one. It's like 5 points banked into your scoring system. The problem of that is that, and this is what it comes down into the second step, is because you have to take more objectives than your opponent, it means that most likely than not, you are going to score max primaries. So now you're at 15 points going into turn 2. So the odds of you winning underdog is if your opponent magically scores more than 15, or if somehow you might have scored 20 of the other battle tactic. If you took an easy one as well, like a board state one, like let's say scouting or attuned, and then you're stuck in a situation where like there is no possible way of getting underdog unless your opponent decides to take a double. And the logic behind I think Games Workshop writing on that is that this is for armies that like are kind of chunky, want to take board state, and then just be like, okay, I don't really care if you take a double. And then they want that kind of like upside for the rest of the game. So 5-stars, for example, were a very good one at that, and they're from a design perspective. Now, and I'll go into step 2 now. I'm kind of hinted at it, but complete this battle tactic when you return if you're the underdog this battle round. If there is at least one friendly unit in a battlefield and at least half a friendly units on battlefield running, use a fight ability this turn. It's way more. It's almost nearly impossible to do this one. Once again, because of the nature of how Wrathful Step 1 occurs, if you do it on turn 1, it's nearly impossible you to get underdog unless your opponent takes advantage of a double. The issue is if they take advantage of a double and they're like, cool, you're underdog, and I'd say I'm playing 5-stars in this case, they could make it so it's impossible for you to achieve the second half of Daring Resurgence. The first half is already very hard to be underdog in most situations. It just comes down to first a dice roll initiative roll, a decision by the player that might be not very good, because the armies that want to take Wrathful usually kind of minimize like somebody taking a double. So it's like if a good player is realizing that, like they're not going to take the double on you, they're just going to pass. So you might not even complete the first half, and then the second half, if a good player is like, cool, I'll take the double, but I'm going to make sure you cannot fight with half of your friendly units by basically being faster than you, choosing engagement, or whatever fact, or more borderline tabling you, if that happens, then like it becomes almost impossible to do Daring Resurgence. And this is fundamentally the issue with Wrathful Cycle. It's this whole section here is kind of counterintuitive to the flow, or not counterintuitive. It's not as systematically designed in a way that goes well with the flow path of the game, right? I think you either have to decide of removing the underdog restriction, or if you do keep the underdog restriction, you just have to change the amount of units that have to fight, right? Maybe make it like 1 or 2 units have to fight, or like 1 hero and 1 unit has to fight or something. The half the rounding up is so brutal in that requirement because of the way the tempo plays. Your opponent just took a double. They're taking it. They're probably doing it because they think they can kill you really hard, and then like Waldry puts you in the backstep, or if they're good players, they're probably, if you're an army that like really negates doubles in terms of presence, board state, whatever, they're just not going to give you a double, and then you're not going to get the underdog mechanic because you're intrinsically scoring 15 points going into the top of one if you do Defiant Surge. So it gets this weird situation. It was like, do you delay Defiant Surge by not taking primary points, but then you're not actually playing the game? So it's like, once again, we talked about the other battle tactics are kind of like designed around doing the game, like playing the game and to win. And this one, it's kind of feel like there's this weird like kind of mathematician like logic of like not doing it, and then it's just like that's why it becomes like a little too gamey. And it doesn't matter even, like with Daring Resurgence being so fundamentally challenging to do in terms because it's counterintuitive. It's just it doesn't feel well. Master of Strategy, and this is the kicker. So we just talked about how hard Daring Resurgence is. Master of Strategy is incredibly difficult. It's one of those battle tactics you get to do if you're just basically winning the game. So if let's just say you manage to do Daring Resurgence, you get to Master of Strategy, it's probably because you're winning the game in the first half. it's like they took a double, they bum rushed you, they didn't do as much damage as they were hoping, and now your entire army is like locked in combat with them, and you get to do daring resurgence, and then now you're like master strategy, cool. Over the period of the game, you probably table them, and then that's what you can do it is. And I'll read it out loud. You complete this battle tactic at the end of the turn. There is a definite friendly unit holding in each large quarter of the battlefield you control, and you control more objectives than your opponent, and there are no enemy units contesting any objectives you control. Gotten close to doing that one once. But it's once again, it's such a hard flow path that if you're doing it, it's because you're tailing your opponent. I don't know what else to say. In terms of difficulty, Wrathful is probably a solid 8, maybe even 9. It's definitely one of the hardest to achieve in terms of battle tactic path. It has a bit of like, board state with controlling more objectives, and has a bit of like tempo, which is about like killing things, and then it has like the big one is like basically like just win the game. It's like more complicated to achieve than Restless Energy one, which is control all objectives. It's actually more. You almost nearly have to do that, plus also extra steps. So yeah, Wrathful I think probably needs to go back to the drawing board. Overall, I don't hate it. I just think like it just needs to be tweaked a little bit to be like not such a kind of a pain in the ass. If you see an army by the way, if you see somebody you think is a good player taking Wrathful, it probably means their army is designed to take doubles on the chin, and just kind of shrug it off. So keep that and keep that in your back pocket when you see somebody take Wrathful. Okay, Scouting Force. So we mentioned this one a couple times earlier and how it synergizes well with Restless and Master of the Path. There's one piece I will warn players that I think a lot of people don't read on Scouting Forces. You have to read the first paragraph over here. A lot of people don't understand you can't do it if you're if your scouting units are in combat, which is a big limiter. And people forget that replacement units that used to be scouting, or if you replace the units that be scouting, the replacement is also scouting, which is massive for certain armies like Feck. Things have a lot of recursion basically, or have recursion options. So once again, non-hero infantry, non-hero cavalry. They changed that in the fact that it can be. It doesn't have to be only those units wholly within friendly territories. It includes units that have maybe moved outside of your friendly territory before the game started. They just fact that, so that's great. Scouting Forces is completely mission dependent, by the way. It doesn't matter how, you have to write a list that works with you. You don't just take 3 units and be like, that's my scouting units. Because once your opponent kills 1, you're like, great, I guess I can't do step 2 or step 1, really, potentially. So it's a design choice, but it's also completely map dependent. And we'll go over it in a bit, but there's a lot of maps where the step 3 of this mission, this tactic path, only has 1 terrain feature you can achieve it on. So your opponent has a very large, telegraph way of stopping it. Okay. And let's just talk through the steps here. Raiding party, you complete this battle tactic at the end of your turn. There are 3 or more friendly scout units holding outside of friendly territory. This can range between difficult and not, because some maps have no man's land. You can achieve that correctly, but sometimes the no man's land is also not in a way where you want to move because it's not towards the things you're trying to do. And I'm thinking of life roots in this scenario, and we'll go over it. But for the most part, if you're playing a mostly cav army, fantastic. It's a fairly doable one, even if there's no man's territory. But there is no man's territory. It's really redundant to say no man's, double negative. You probably won't score until the second turn, which can put the clock. Scouting Force is one of those battle tactic paths. You have to start the clock as soon as possible and not wait later, because as you wait later, the options of your scouting units surviving are, unless you're playing basically Feck or something's massive recursions or recursion positive potential, it gets really hard to achieve for the second half of the game. So raiding party, easy on certain maps, doing turn 1. It's not so easy on some, depending on the army construction, like I said. Bold Explorer, you complete this battle tactic if you turn 3. At the end of your turn, if 3 or more objectives or terrain features that you control in any combination are contested by any friendly scout units, these objectives and terrain feature must be within enemy territory. So this one you can actually do with 2 scout units, because the scout unit can control 1 objective, 1 terrain feature, and another one can control either another objective or terrain feature. So you can do it with 2 units. instead of 3 like the first one. But it is like, once again, like depending on the maps and territories and and so forth, it varies drastically, right? And it's what's important to also know is that you can't do that in combat, so you cannot score any of these if you're in combat. So keep that in mind. So this one it's easy-ish depending on like if you're playing Sylvaneth. I think Sylvaneth is one of the armies that like the scouting force is the best out of this edition because of just the teleportation. They have recursion through a Larial. Like they're just like they do scouting forces probably the best of any army. I think second best is probably Feck to be fair. And so keep bold, explore, doable. Courageous Adventurous. This is the last step I was referring to. You can make this battle tactic at the end of your turn if a friendly scout unit that was not set up this turn is contesting a terrain feature you control that is wholly in enemy territory and is more than 6 inches from friendly territory. Yeah, that one is, like I said, most maps only have one terrain feature you can do that, unless your opponent puts a faction terrain down. But like most like maps, don't. So this comes back to my advice earlier. If you want to counterplay somebody with scouted forces and you have a faction terrain, don't put it down. Unless you're playing the Lumineth terrain feature and just move that towards their deployment in that territory, or like outside of your own territory. But like it's like, terrain features are rarely. There's so few armies that benefit like that much from terrain features, and it's so against armies that have scouting forces, you're probably better off not putting your terrain feature down and like don't worry about it. Like just ignore it. I don't think at the time of recording, I don't think that faction terrains don't count towards scouting force, and so today I still believe they do. So yeah, if you're playing like even Yukon, you don't need your terrain feature. Don't put it down. Or for KO, don't put it down. It's not worth it. The KO one has like ways to prevent teleportations with that little auto entrance, so I could see like maybe you still consider, but like why take the risk? Just don't bother putting it down, and it's just like it's okay. And then that removes like you. In some cases, you're doubling your opponent's ability to score the third step of Courageous Adventure. If you only have to worry about one terrain feature, you can kind of like leave resources to like because most of the scouting units are going to be using to do that are probably in other things are going to be able to remove units off the table. So especially if you're playing it, they're using recursion as a way to do it, right? So anyway, scouting forces on the way out rated as doable. Complexity, it's like higher the number, the harder it is. I'd probably give it like a solid like 6. It's not as easy as it looks. It's going to be totally mission dependent, and it's going to be totally army design dependent. And the last stack, battle tactic, is Attuned to Ghyran. Now, Attuned to Ghyran was another one I really liked, and I was trying to make it work. It's definitely a lot easier than Wrathful. I guess that's not true. It's easier than Wrathful. And the reason why I like the Attuned to Ghyran once again is a Fire Slayer mentality. Sacred Centrality is the old like seize the center. Basically, you complete this battle tactic and you turn if there are at least 2 friendly units within 3 inches of the center of the battlefield and are not in combat. Exactly how old seize. If you're an army that's like high drops, you're probably going first, or you're choosing to go first, like because you're using Attuned and Wrathful because you're trying to give your opponent to take a double. You're going to be in a situation where, like, this is a situation I was running into when I was running Attuned with Wrathful. I would basically get 20 points every game on the first turn, which meant the underdog only depended on a double. But it's still Sacred Centrality is one of those like it's super achievable turn 1. And once you get it done, like the second one sounds pretty achievable, right? Okay, let's go into phase strikes. You complete this battle tactic at the end of the turn, and the following are true. If all the following are true, at least 2 friendly units use a retreat ability this turn. Those units are the lure units, and by the way, the fact that requiring you to move, because the retreats did not require you to move when you made those retreat abilities. You just took damage, and then that's it. You didn't have to move, but now they clarified that you must move. And at least 2 other friendly units used a charge ability this turn, and at least one of those units ended the charge move in combat with an enemy unit, which any of the lure units retreated. So it says at least 2 units use a charge ability. It doesn't require you to make 2 charges. It requires at least one of those charges to have ended. So you need at least one of those charges to have ended, and it must end against a lure unit. You can attempt a second charge and fail, or choose to not make the charge, and then as long as you use the ability, you scored it. But the change to the retreat requirement is interesting because in a lot of ways, phase strikes went from being like kind of doable to like really hard to do now. Because armies, which are low unit count armies, can't really sacrifice a retreat on one of their units. and then not engage and not being able to fight. So, and there's not that many armies right now have retreat and charge mechanics like they, in the game. So there's not a lot of them can just natively do this one very well. The other problem with phase strikes I've found out as I've played more games is that if you're an army like Fire Slayers that like really punishes people from taking doubles, or you're just incredibly good at combat, most people are not going to throw their units at you. And or if they do, they might, on their turn, they might even die before you get to retreat during your turn. So it's incredibly kind of funny how like phase strike like flies in these very slim margin of like it's like I said, it's probably better for armies that are like massive MSU, not necessarily, so that way you don't necessarily potentially kill what you're fighting, and then you have potential of like retreating and then keeping things in combat. I tried this with like my Blade Lord Lumineth list, and like I was finding myself in situations where like I couldn't, like I had nothing to retreat against. They would die during my opponent's units would die during his turn. Or if I did choose to retreat units, I could only retreat one and not two, so I couldn't do phase strike. So it was actually kind of like the second step of Wrathful. It's like it seems plausible, and like it's hard. It's like required tempo. It's a tempo play, but like the tempo plays are hard and far to come between. And then not only that, like if you're tabling your opponent, like especially in the second half of the game, and you still haven't finished these steps, the odds are you're never going to do them. So, yeah, they're kind of these two are kind of weirdly like stuck at the 5-point like stage, and like maybe 10 points if your opponent's army is slightly, I'm going to say, better than yours in terms of like raw efficiency. Then lastly, Purification Rites. You complete this battle and your turn if there are no enemy units within friendly territory, no enemy units within neutral territory. So that one's, once again, like kind of a repeat of the step 2 of, I think it was Master of the Path. And it's not that hard to do, especially if the game's going in your favor. But the problem is getting to that step is sometimes, almost very hard. The few times I've seen phase strikes are doable for some of the armies I've been playing. And I'm not saying this is going to be the case for everybody. I'm just saying from my personal experience, is that if I'm already so far behind and I get to take a double of no penalty, and so I already charge, and then I get to immediately retreat 2 units before I get my next round of combat, so I can still have something to retreat. Like that's the only time it's actually happened from experience. I don't know. On paper, I really like Wrathful and Attuned as a combination for Fire Slayers. But it turns out like they really only get like 5 points. Like it's really hard to get like 20 points. That was the difference between a GT win and a GT loss in some cases for me, or in the case for me, I should say, at Ironweld, because I took either Wrathful or like if I had to swap Attune or Wrathful to like maybe Intercept, I probably would have won the game I lost and probably would have placed a lot higher in the GT. So from that experience, I've learned that like you should probably avoid Wrathful and Attune. Oh, sorry, scoreability of Attune, solid 7 out of 10. It's very difficult. You should. It really, unfortunately, comes down to like we have 6 great cards, but really only about 3 of them are worth like considering for most armies. Master the Path, Restless Energy, and Scouting. Right. You can argue Intercept is like the 4th choice, but it's really for armies that can't do the first 3. That's really what it comes down to. Like they can maybe like first 3 and in combination, you might be able to do one of the 3, but then like you're like these as the second options like too hard, so you get stuck with the Intercept and Recover. Wrathful and Tune probably like like Wrathful said earlier, probably need a complete rework in step 2. I don't think the step 3 needs to be reworked, but the step 2 do need to get reworked for them to be like a little more actually tempo driven and not completely like like they're a giant wall to climb over versus the other one, or make him like a little bit like, or make, if you do step 2 in those missions, like the step 3 should be like easier instead of like vice versa. But I mean that's not the point of these battle tactics, right? Okay. I promised I was going to go over some of the mission and how they interact, so let's do into that with the battle tactics. So, I don't know this. probably should edit my crop. It's fine. This is passing seasons, the mission number 1. Sorry guys, I'm gonna scroll over like this. So we talked about how I'll primarily focus on scouting forces and restless energy on this conversation. Those are the 2 that matter the most in terms of board state, in my opinion. I mean, you can make the argument Master of the Path also matters, but like in reality, like in terms of how the game plays, the scouting forces and Master of the Path are going to be one that matter the most, right? Because of how they're designed. So this is a great example of like where doing scouting forces is super good, because you need to go in no man's territory, and that's towards objectives, of course. So that rewards you for playing the mission, especially since you need on turn 1 you can only score the green ones, and then turn 2 it's the red ones, and like rotate keeps flipping off and on. And then in terms of like options for your for scouting for last step, though, you're limited to just. If you're the defender, I mean, it doesn't matter from both sides. You only have one piece of trade you can achieve for that last step, which is where it comes back into play, where units that can recur, massive advantage, because most of the time the game is taking place away from this home objective, so you can kind of recur safely and score it, or teleport safely and score it. Actually, can you teleport and score it? Yeah, I believe so. And in terms of like like the other ones, like Attuned, like going down the center away from objectives, so it's not great. In terms of like scoring more objectives with your opponent, so, obviously that just plays out the game. And then scoring an objective the only objective in your opponent's territory, quite something you need to be positioned to do anyway, because you have to score these, and there's only one. Anytime there's only one objective in your opponent's territory, it's a fairly achievable one to do. It's when there becomes like more than one, it gets a little complicated. All right, Path of the Fae. Hopefully they'll eventually get rid of this underdog mechanic. So if you are following the maps correctly, and I'm prefacing this for scouting here, these 2 forests here should not be part of the ability for you to score that battle tactic. I believe they intend them to be 6 inches from your territory. So once again, the only terrain feature you can score on scouting per the map should be these trees over here. Once again, if you're a reserve a teleport army, the game mostly takes part away from these terrain features, so fairly doable and accessible. You'll also have no man's land, where objectives are on the side, and they're super advantageous to, they're important to take. So you get to take scouting and do the things you're trying to do. Now, in terms of Relentless Energy, taking all of your objectives in your opponent's territory, incredibly easy. There's an objective down the center that you're going to fight over. So, once again, like these objectives, and then the best part of this one, if you go for, it's only going to matter for if you're playing Wrathful, you can, it's really easy to just score Wrathful by just tagging the center objective. Your opponent can't start any objective unless they have like some scouting mechanics or pre-game move mechanics, right? So, yeah. But once again, a mission stack that broadly favors, as we talked about, the first 3: Relentless, Master of the Path, and Scouting Forces. Now, you could argue, like, especially this one in terms of like Master of the Path. Wow, mental. Return my number of them. Just taking the corners. You're already trying to take the corners of the objective, so it's like it kind of plays into the mission as well. Rolling Roots. All right. This gets a little bit funner. Once again, only one terrain piece you can score for Scouting Forces. This is going to become a repeated pattern. You have a big no man's land. The no man's land's like on objectives, you're trying very big for Scouting Forces. You can also do step 2, a little bit more complicated, because you have to tag these terrain features over here, because they have to be inside enemy territory. But you got objectives here, and oh no, they don't count. Yeah, so step 2 is Scouting Forces, maybe a little difficult here. And then in terms of owning objective in your opponent's territory, once again, there's only one, so it is fairly doable. At least it is doable, versus when there's more than one, it gets like a little too crazy into them in terms of that. So I like this mission a lot, because it doesn't really favor one specifically or another. And in terms of like, if you want to do, if you're still trying to do Wrathful or Attuned, like at least taking the center And I should mention, like in the previous mission, at least taking the center plays pretty big in your favor as the mission design goes on. Right. Cyclic shift. Okay. This one, I'm pretty sure these terrain features are supposed to be a whole inside your territory for scouting forces. So once again, only one piece you can control. Now, in terms of controlling all objectives in your opponent's deployment zone, it gets a little bit more challenging because now there's an extra one, and they're not near each other at all. In fact, like the one that's full in your opponent's territory is like pretty far away from everything else you're trying to do. In terms of scouting forces, at least they have the ability to kind of do it since there's a objective touching their opponent's territory and then terrain feature as well. But it is like, like I said, scouting gets a little bit more complicated once like these, like when you actually break it down by maps, it's not as easy as it looks. Like in terms of like Attuned, you have a good center position because you're going to be pressuring on the pair objective anyway. But it is like, we talked about, white armies are going to have trouble with this one because this is a big like kind of like keep away mission, right? Like in terms of like how the army design. So like, armies which have MSU with fast mobility going to be much more favored into it. Then we got Surge of Slaughter. Surge of Slaughter is great for, let me bring up the map. Surge of Slaughter is great for scouting. You have 3 terrain feature you can easily get to for the last step. You also have multiple objectives in enemy territory while also having terrain features in enemy territory. Very easy for scouting. You also have the ability to do control an objective inside your opponent's territory. It's just down the center. Very favorable for Restless energy. And or take an objective back from your opponent if you took the center or the edge one. So because you can't start controlling the unless you have a pregame move, the red one, so they're very accessible. And it's also good for Attuned, controlling the center and so forth. But like once again, the first 3 in this one mission are greatly more favored. Link ley line, once again, fortunately for scouting, really only one terrain piece you can do. Only one objective you can do in your opponent's territory, and it's a fairly close one to what you're trying to do. So it makes the Restless energy much more accessible. Obviously, from Attuned, lots of center play, quite tangible. But also, step 2 of scouting gets a little bit wackier because you have to basically pressure. And you're always trying to pressure your opponent's home objective, but like it gets a little bit harder for that. Am I reading? By the way, guys, I'm just going to double check. Am I reading the second step of scouting incorrectly? I want to make sure. There's a part of my head that keeps like basically going back and saying I'm wrong about this. You can win this battle, take them, you turn through them, object to control, and then you can control. If any must be, there must be an enemy territory. I'm not crazy. Okay, sorry, I was just having a moment of doubt with myself here. So Link ley line, I think is probably one of the favorite mission of this packet in terms of design, and I do like that. Even Wrathful and Attuned can participate okay in this mission because this is much more of a brawler center mission. And scouting obviously suffers a lot on this, right? Versus some of the other ones. Nauseous Nexus. All right, this is another great mission for Restless, taking home objectives. There's only 2, and they're important, so great. Scouting suffers a lot more on this one as well because you only have one terrain feature you can do step 3 on. You have a lot more accessibility for doing step 2 than some of the other maps we're looking at, but at least it's so it's just a step 3. It's like it gets a little bit harder, right? Unless your opponent puts a faction terrain down somewhere. I keep assuming people are not going to put faction terrain against people with scouting, but you never know, unless they're movable terrain featured. And then in terms of Wrathful and Attuned, it's like a little bit like, unless you're going first, it's kind of hard to do Attuned on this mission. And Wrathful, to be honest. So not a big fan of it. It's going to completely come down to who goes first, right, on this. This is what I was talking about earlier for scouting and life. So in terms of life route, like the nice thing about moving in the no man's territories is that like you need I forgot to talk about more units in no man's. I mean, it's pretty self-obvious, guys. Sorry. In terms of scouting forces, it's just weird because you're trying to move away from like the natural direction of this board state is kind of like in this angular towards your opponent's like home objective. But with scouting forces, you're kind of doing this like kind of like a round, like a U-turn to get there. Holding these two terrain features near your no man's land is important because then you need them for life proof points. But at the same time, it's breaking kind of like how you want to play this mission over the long run. It's not the worst thing. It's just interestingly like actually the battle tactic path that probably suffers the most is the having more units in the neutral zone territory than your opponent. Unless you're obviously doing it with scouting, then you're like, great, that's what I'm going for anyway. So. And then we got Bountiful Equinox. This is where it gets a little tricky because there's 3 objectives in your opponent's territory now. So scoring that one with Restless Energy gets hard. There's also no more No Man's Land. Yeah, and then once again, you'll notice there's only one terrain feature you can do for the step 3 of scouting. Like step 2 is not so bad, but step 3 gets a little bit more harder, especially since that terrain feature is near like an important objective. So depending on the tempo of the game, you might be able to do it just because of how the you'll be able to break through and the center. But or if you have recursion that comes back. But either way, it's not as obvious for scouting. Life cycle. I think this is also a pretty fun mission. You'll notice once again there's only one terrain feature for scouting you can do on the edge cases here. Big no man's land, so it's easy to do no man's land. The issue is how to get to step 2 of scouting. It's you're gonna have to fight over the side objectives. It's not the worst, but it's also kind of challenging. And then especially since you have to be no, it's actually not that bad. It's not the 6 inches is for this a third step. It's not the second step, so it's not that bad. And then Wrathful. Sorry, Attuned's not so bad either because you're going down the center, plus you need to keep pressuring. I know the mission doesn't really kind of look like you're going down the center, but the center is like the strongest play here because it gets you in reach of all the objectives or threatens all the objectives constantly. And then in terms of Restless Energy, once again, have more units in No Man's Land. Like it just feels like Restless Energy pairs very asymmetrically with scouting forces. Creeping Corruption. Yeah, I think that's the worst. This is actually the missions that's probably the worst for Master of the Path. Not Master of the Path. For Restless Energy, like 3 objectives in your opponent's territory, not near each other. Like it's the widest. It's one of the widest mission. Like it's not good. In terms of scouting forces, much easier path flow. So even if you take Restless Energy, and then you get in a situation where you also have scouting, at least you're not punished with scouting too much. Because you have multiple terrain pieces you can get easily. Like if you do step 1 of scouting, you're basically doing step 2 of scouting. So for the most part, it's pretty accessible. But scoring all your opponent's objectives in their territory is going to be hard for step 3, right? And especially on this mission, and even having more of your units inside the opponent's territory and none of yours, I believe that's the requirement. It's going to be fairly hard on this mission, so not ideal for the top stack on that. But it's not like it's also ideal for Attuned or Wrathful, right? Because like taking the center is important, but like it's also this is a keep away mission, so phase strikes is going to be very hard to do. Being underdog is going to be hard to do. Actually, like you can't even get to step 2 of Wrathful unless you take one of your opponent's objectives away. And obviously, you maintain all of yours, which for a lot of armies is not very doable. So yeah, in terms of battle tactic, I still think like this one favors like. Now I take that what I said back. It favors the top 3 anyway, because how difficult it is on the bottom 2, the worst 2 to do. All right, and then this is what mission? Grasp for the Thorns. So I'm trying to speed through this because I don't want to make this video too long, guys. This is much better for us. There's only 2 objectives, but they're still very far from each other. In terms of scouting forces, you have 2 objectives you can do for turn 3, and you have pretty good potential for doing. If you do step 1 of scouting, you're doing step 2 as well. Once again, not so good for Attuned because the objectives are fairly. They're not that far. You still want to fight over the center, but I think these obstacles in the center are going to be a problem. And so it comes back down to, having the mission stacks might not favor scanning all the time, but they do favor Restless Energy most of the time, and they do favor Master the Path most of the time over Wrathful and Attuned. So, okay. Whew. Sorry about that, guys. I was trying to walk through that super fast because it's already at 40. It's almost an hour recording for this, and that's a long time for me chatting about, I would say, very thoroughly and expensive stick. I will put out a link on this comment section where I basically give each mission like a kind of like a tier system for like which battle tactic plan like is ideal for this, like which one's more favored than others, so that way you can come up with a calculation that says, hey, if this mission pack has these missions, here's like the heat map for which battle tactics you want to take, right, in combination. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't take these with an army that can't do them. It's just saying it's more favorable for that flow path. So if you're really trying to win a GT in this case, you can literally, like, instead of designing an army to win a GT, or take an army to win a GT, I'm going to take an army that has the highest potential win, like, point system, right? In that regard, which is, I guess, a little bit different than how I think most people think about like winning a GT. We usually think about winning a GT through the eyes of playing the most efficient army on the table, but there's an argument for efficiency being, and this especially the GHB being, the army that has the easiest flow path of scoring points, kind of irregardless of what's happening on the table. I mean, there's a limit to that, right? There's, like, I'll give you an example. I think the Git Mob AOR is incredibly good at doing these battle tactics and a lot of these maps. Problem is, in terms of ability to remove things off the table, it's incredibly challenging, which means that, like, it gets hard for them in the later half of the game to, basically prevent their opponent from stopping them from scoring points, right? So there is a limit to the madness. Just, you got to find that right, the right level of modicum balance between all of it. Okay. Hopefully this recording will be posted online soon, and no issues and no technical difficulties. And thank you all for listening, and I hope you subscribe. And please post comments, especially if it's to correct me on some of my takes, and especially rules interactions. I'm not perfect, and I do really appreciate when people point it out to me. I am in no bar hold myself to like the voice of perfection regarding this stuff. Okay. Thank you so much for listening.